December 1944, somewhere in the frozen hills of eastern France, a Sherman tank burns so hot the snow around it turns black. A hatch slams open. A tanker drops into the cold, one sleeve already on fire, his boots sinking into the ice while German machine gun rounds snap against the steel behind him. He should run. He does not. He beats the flames out, climbs onto another tank, and goes back toward the guns. His leg is already ruined from a wound that should have put him in a hospital. He has refused evacuation. He has refused morphine. He is bleeding through a bandage while the army he serves still argues on paper whether men like him have the courage to fight. His name was Reuben Rivers. He was a black sharecropper's son from Oklahoma. And when he finally died, his commander was so certain he had witnessed the highest kind of courage that he sent the army a recommendation for the Medal of Honor. The army buried it for more than 50 years. This is the story of the 761st Tank Battalion. 700 black soldiers trained for armor by a country that did not believe black men belonged inside tanks. A battalion left waiting for 2 years while white crews died overseas. A unit the system expected to fail, and the one moment when that system ran out of excuses, because George Patton needed tanks more than he needed the lie. By the time the 761st finished, they had fought for 183 days, crossed France, smashed into Germany, helped tear open the last defenses of Hitler's Reich, and proved an entire chain of command catastrophically wrong. But before they could fight the Germans, they had to survive something colder: their own army. In 1942, America was fighting a world war with a segregated military. More than 1 million black Americans would wear the uniform, but most were pushed into the jobs white commanders thought were safe for them: loading ships, cooking meals, digging roads, driving supply trucks, carrying the machinery of war without being trusted to use it. The excuse was not hidden. It was written into reports, repeated in offices, passed through chains of command with the confidence of policy. Black soldiers, they said, lacked the intelligence for complicated machines. They lacked the discipline for armored warfare. They lacked the nerve to stay steady when artillery started landing close. A tank was not just a gun on tracks. It was an engine, radio, cannon, gears, optics, fuel, smoke, and panic packed inside a steel box moving through chaos. And the army had decided that an entire race was unfit for that box. So when the 761st Tank Battalion was activated on April 1st, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, it was not born from trust. It was born inside a challenge the army expected to win. Give them tanks, train them, watch them fail, file the lesson. The men of the 761st understood this immediately. Every mistake carried more weight than a mistake should. A bad gunnery score was not just a bad score. A rough drill was not just a rough drill. A white tanker could be tired, green, careless, unlucky. A black tanker had to know that one slip would be written as evidence. Evidence that the doubters had been right all along. That was the trap. They were not being trained like ordinary soldiers. They were being tested like an accusation. And still, they trained. They trained in Louisiana mud and Texas heat. They learned to drive Shermans, load cannons, read maps, repair engines, talk over radios, and keep moving when everything inside the tank was noise and fumes. Their motto was simple: come out fighting. Not wait your turn, not prove yourself quietly, come out fighting. But for 2 years, the army would not let them do it. While the 761st ran drill after drill in the United States, the real war moved without them. North Africa burned. Italy bled. France waited behind German concrete and guns. On June 6, 1944, Allied troops stormed Normandy in the largest amphibious invasion in history. Men went over the beaches into machine gun fire, tanks drowned in the surf, crews were cut apart by mines and anti-tank guns. And the 761st was still in Texas, fully trained, fully equipped, unused. Week after week, white armored units overseas asked for replacements. Week after week, Sherman crews died in steel coffins that could turn into furnaces in seconds. And week after week, hundreds of trained black tankers sat in America, polishing machines they were told they might never fire in anger. It was not because there was no need. It was because the Army would rather waste talent than question its own prejudice. That might have continued until the war ended. Then George S. Patton ran into a problem prejudice could not solve. By the autumn of 1944, Patton's Third Army was driving across France with terrifying speed. He wanted movement, pressure, pursuit. He wanted the Germans off balance and kept there. But speed eats men and machines. Tanks broke down. Tanks hit mines. Tanks burned. Crews died faster than the replacement pipeline could fill the empty seats. Patton needed trained armor crews, not theories, not committee arguments, crews now. The uncomfortable truth is that Patton was not a civil rights hero. His private views on race were harsh by any honest standard. He was not asking for the 761st because he had suddenly become a believer in equality. He was asking because he wanted to win. And somebody told him that a fully trained black tank battalion had been sitting unused for 2 years. To many officers, sending that battalion into the most aggressive armored campaign in Europe sounded reckless. They had already made up their minds. The 761st would panic. The 761st would freeze. The 761st could not be trusted beside white infantry. The 761st would become proof that segregation had been necessary all along. Patton looked at the problem differently. He had holes in his line. He had burning tanks. He had trained men available. And he had heard the 761st could shoot. So he did the thing the Army had quietly arranged never to do. He asked for them. Not as labor troops, not as fuel handlers, not as a symbolic experiment, as a combat tank battalion. The order hit like a thunderclap. After 2 years of being delayed, doubted, and parked, the men of the 761st packed their gear, crossed the Atlantic, and entered France in late October 1944. A few days later, they formed up in the cold while a convoy rolled toward them. Out stepped the most recognizable general in the American Army. Patton climbed onto the hood of a vehicle so all of them could see him. Ivory-handled pistols on his hips, helmet shining, voice hard enough to cut through the wind. And he told them something many of those men had never heard from any officer with real power. He told them they were soldiers. He told them he would not have asked for them if they were not good. He told them the eyes of their people and the eyes of the country were on them. Then came the line that stayed with survivors for the rest of their lives. He did not care what color a man was, so long as that man went up the line and killed the enemy. To modern ears, that line is rough. To the men standing there in 1944, it was also a key turning in a lock. For 2 years, the official voice of the Army had told them they were not fit to fight. Now the most famous field commander in Europe was saying, in front of all of them, "I asked for you. I expect you to fight. You belong in the line." That was not justice. Not yet. It was a chance. And the 761st knew chances given under suspicion can vanish after one bad day. The Germans were dug into eastern France, behind mines, roadblocks, artillery, and anti-tank guns. The country ahead was a map of small towns, tree lines, muddy roads, and stone buildings that could hide a gun until it fired. Every road could be trapped. Every bridge could be blown. Every bend could become a grave. The Army had predicted the 761st would break at the first real barrage. In early November 1944, the prediction met the battlefield. The 761st entered combat near the towns and ridges of Lorraine, attached to infantry divisions that did not always know what to make of them. Some infantrymen did not want black tankers beside them. Others changed their minds the moment the shooting started, because when the Germans opened fire, the men inside those Shermans did not run. They advanced. They knocked out guns. They crushed roadblocks. They pushed through villages that had stalled other units. They took casualties immediately. Tanks were hit. Officers were killed. Friends disappeared into smoke and flame. But the battalion did the one thing the Army's own reports had said it could not do. It held together under fire. Then it moved forward again. This is where Reuben Rivers stopped being just one good sergeant in a good battalion and became the center of the story. Rivers had been born in 1918 in Tecumseh, Oklahoma, one of 12 children in a sharecropping family. He picked cotton. He worked around machinery. He learned engines the way poor men often learn them, by fixing what nobody else can afford to replace. The men who served with him remembered him as quiet, steady, almost impossible to shake. He was not the loudest man in the unit. He did not need to be. Inside a Sherman tank, the loud man is not always the one who keeps you alive. Sometimes it is the man who goes still when everyone else goes scared. That was Rivers. When the 761st pushed toward the French town of Gebling, the roads ahead were blocked and mined. The Germans had blown crossings and prepared the route to slow Patton's advance one brutal yard at a time. A column can die at a roadblock. It stacks up. It becomes a target. Artillery finds it. Anti-tank guns pick it apart. Rivers saw the problem and did not wait for someone else to solve it. Under fire, he climbed out, attached a cable to the obstruction, and dragged it clear so the column could move. That sort of act could win a medal. Rivers treated it like work. Then his tank hit a mine. The blast tore into his leg. Not a scrape, not a clean wound. A deep, ugly wound, bad enough that medics knew his war should be over. They told him to evacuate. They were right. A wound like that meant shock, infection, maybe amputation, maybe death. He had already done enough, more than enough. No man in that battalion would have called him a coward for taking the aid station and a ticket out. Rivers refused. They offered him morphine. He refused that too. Not because he enjoyed pain, because morphine clouds the mind, and he still had a tank to command. So they bandaged the leg. He climbed into another Sherman. And for 3 days, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers kept fighting, with a wound that should have carried him away from the front. 3 days. While commanders told him to pull back. While his body demanded that he stop. While every mile of frozen road took more blood from him. He stayed because his men were still there. That was the whole answer. His men were still there. On November 19, 1944, near Bugaltroff, German anti-tank guns caught the company in a murderous position. The order came to withdraw. It was the correct order. The guns were too well placed. The fire was too intense. Staying meant losing more tanks and more men. Rivers heard the order. Then he saw the guns. He radioed that he had them in sight. And instead of pulling back, he turned his Sherman toward the fire. One tank moved forward into the teeth of the ambush. Not because it could win alone, because it could draw the German gunners' eyes. Because every second they spent firing at Rivers was a second the rest of the company had to get out. He opened fire. The Germans answered. Steel against steel. One wounded sergeant, one Sherman tank, buying time with everything left in him. Then a German round found the tank. Reuben Rivers was killed instantly, still facing the enemy, still covering his men, still doing the job the Army had said men like him could not do. Captain David Williams saw enough of it to know exactly what he had witnessed. Williams was a white officer in a black unit at a time when defending black soldiers too forcefully could cost a man his career. The easy move was silence. The safe move was to let the system make its excuses. Williams did not choose the safe move. He wrote Rivers up for the Medal of Honor, the highest award the United States could give. And by the Army's own standard, Rivers had earned it. He refused evacuation, fought through a catastrophic wound, then sacrificed himself to save his company. The recommendation entered a system that had no trouble accepting black sacrifice, only black glory. The 761st did not get to stop and mourn properly. Combat does not leave room for justice. The battalion kept moving. By December 1944, Hitler launched his last great offensive through the Ardennes, the desperate attack history would call the Battle of the Bulge. The German plan was enormous and almost mad. Split the Allied line, drive toward Antwerp, and force the Western Allies into crisis. For a few terrifying days, it nearly worked. Snow swallowed the roads. Fog grounded Allied aircraft. German units punched a deep bulge into the American line. The cold itself became an enemy. Weapons froze, engines failed. Wounded men lay in snow long enough for the weather to finish what bullets had started. And the 761st was thrown into that winter, not as a protected experiment, as a fighting unit. They moved where they were needed, attached and reattached to divisions, backing infantry, breaking resistance, and absorbing the same misery as every other frontline unit with one extra burden. They still had to prove what should have been obvious. Every heavy loss could be read by the wrong officer as failure. Every success could be called exception. Every report could be buried under a familiar silence. But the battlefield kept recording the truth in its own language. German guns knocked out. Villages taken. Counterattacks stopped. Shermans lost and replaced and lost again. Black tankers pulling men out of trouble who had not wanted them there the day before. In January 1945, the battalion fought around the Belgian village of Tillet. On a map, Tillet did not look like much. A cluster of roads, stone houses, fields buried under snow. But in war, small villages become locks. Put enough guns into them and they can hold an entire advance by the throat. The Germans had turned Tillet into a strong point, packed with anti-tank weapons, armor, and infantry who understood that every hour they delayed Patton bought the Reich one more hour to breathe. The 761st went in through snow deep enough to slow men to a crawl. German guns fired from buildings and tree lines. Shermans rolled forward with little cover. Some burned. Men bailed out into the cold, sometimes on fire, sometimes wounded, sometimes both. And still, the attack came again. This was not clean, cinematic war. It was blind angles and frozen hands. Tank crews firing over open sights at windows. Infantry moving behind armor through streets where every doorway could spit death. Engines coughing, tracks grinding, smoke hanging low in the cold air. The Germans counterattacked. The 761st held. More armor came in. The 761st fought it off. For days the village was chewed apart, house by house and gun by gun, until the German position finally cracked. Tillet did not fall because of speeches. It fell because the men the army expected to break kept coming back through the snow. Skill, discipline, nerve. The exact qualities denied to them before they ever saw combat. From there, the battalion pushed on, through the remains of the Bulge, toward Germany's western defenses, into the Siegfried Line, the belt of bunkers, concrete obstacles, and interlocking guns built to stop an invasion at the border of the Reich. The 761st helped break through it. They crossed into Germany. They fought through the spring as Nazi power collapsed from the outside in. And then, near the end, they came upon a kind of horror different from combat. In early May 1945, elements of the battalion were among American forces reaching Gunskirchen, a concentration camp in Austria. Inside were thousands of prisoners starving in filth, many already beyond saving. The black soldiers of the 761st, men whose own country had denied their dignity, opened gates for people the Nazis had tried to erase entirely. Some gave away their own rations. Some stood stunned by what they had found. There are moments when history becomes almost too bitter to hold in one hand. Black Americans, segregated by their own army, helping liberate victims of a regime built on racial hatred. By the time the war in Europe ended, the 761st had fought for 183 days in near-continuous combat. They had crossed France and pushed into Germany and Austria. They had helped take towns, destroy enemy positions, and break open defenses that were supposed to slow the Allied advance. Their own losses were heavy. Their record was undeniable. The battalion earned Silver Stars, Bronze Stars, Purple Hearts, battlefield respect, and the kind of reputation that cannot be created by public relations. Where the 761st was sent, the line moved. And still, when the shooting stopped, the country did what it had done before. It looked away. No black American soldier received the Medal of Honor during World War II. Not one. More than 1 million served. Many fought. Some performed acts of courage so clear that even hostile systems could not honestly misunderstand them. But the medals did not come. Reuben Rivers was dead. Captain Williams had written the recommendation. The witnesses existed. The facts existed. The file existed. Then it disappeared into the machinery, not formally denied in a way that could be appealed, not publicly debated, just gone. That is one of the cleanest ways a system protects itself. It does not always shout no. Sometimes it simply lets the paper die. The survivors came home to another battlefield. They had worn the uniform of the United States and Europe. They had fought Nazis. They had helped open roads into Germany. Some had seen camps where human beings were starved behind wire. Then they returned to a country where many of them still could not vote freely, eat where they wanted, stay where they wanted, or be buried beside the white soldiers they had fought to save. The insult was not only personal, it was strategic. For 2 years, the Army had wasted a trained tank battalion because of a lie. Think about that. While replacement crews were dying overseas, while units needed trained men, while Shermans burned from Normandy to Lorraine, the 761st sat waiting because the institution preferred its prejudice to its own urgent need. That was not just racism as cruelty, it was racism as military incompetence. It cost opportunity, it cost strength, it may have cost lives. The 761st proved something larger than courage. They proved that prejudice does not only injure the people it targets, it blinds the people who believe in it. The old lie did not survive untouched. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ordering the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. The 761st did not cause that alone. History is never that simple. But units like the 761st made the old argument harder to say with a straight face. How do you insist black soldiers cannot fight when black tankers have just spent 183 days doing it? How do you defend segregated military logic when the evidence from the battlefield says the logic was false? Every town taken, every gun knocked out, every after-action report that failed to show the collapse predicted by the doubters became part of a pressure the country could not ignore forever. Still, recognition for the battalion itself came slowly, too slowly. In 1978, 33 years after the war ended, the 761st finally received the Presidential Unit Citation. By then, many of the men were older. Some were gone. Some had lived whole lives carrying memories their country had not officially honored. And Reuben Rivers still had no Medal of Honor. The question hung over the record for decades. How could it be that not one black soldier in all of World War II had earned the nation's highest award? Was that possible? Or was the absence itself evidence? In the 1990s, the Army finally reviewed the cases of black World War II soldiers who had been denied the Medal of Honor. Researchers went back through records, recommendations, reports, and testimony. What they found was not a shortage of valor, it was a pattern of injustice. The courage had been there. The system had refused to honor it. On January 13, 1997, more than half a century after World War II, the United States awarded the Medal of Honor to 7 black soldiers who had been passed over. Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers was one of them. He could not stand in the White House. His family stood there for him. 52 years after he turned his tank toward German guns so other men could live, the country finally admitted what his commander had known the day he died. He had earned it. Captain David Williams had kept faith with the man he saw sacrifice everything. The record, at last, told the truth. But the truth came late. Late enough that the medal became both honor and indictment. Honor for Rivers. Indictment of the system that needed 5 decades to recognize what had been visible in one frozen field. That is the final shape of this story. Not a simple redemption. Not the Army doubting the 761st, then happily learning its lesson. The truth is harder. The 761st fought the Germans with American tanks. They fought the cold with bodies pushed beyond endurance. They fought their own institution with performance so undeniable it could be delayed, but not erased. They were built into an experiment meant to confirm a prejudice. Instead, they became evidence against it. Reuben Rivers was born into a country that expected very little from him. He picked cotton on land his family did not own. He joined an army that doubted his mind, his courage, and his right to command a machine in combat. Then, when the moment came, he did not merely do his duty, he exceeded the imagination of the men who had judged him. A wounded black sergeant from Oklahoma, refusing morphine, refusing evacuation, steering a Sherman into enemy fire so his company could live. That is not a footnote. That is the center. The 761st Tank Battalion came out fighting exactly as their motto promised, against the Wehrmacht, against winter, against the lie written into their own army's files. And the last fight, the fight for the truth, took longer than all the others. But they won that one too. They were told they would break. They came out fighting, and they never broke.